Jane and Sam. Because I figured even if they read them, they, get a kick to give them something to computers.
Great.
I will call the meeting to order. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Sue?
Yes.
Cindy?
Yes.
John Hogue?
Yes.
I'm sorry. Nancy Strand?
Yes.
Mark Jensen?
Here.
John Haberlick?
Here.
And Kurt.
We need to call in, yeah. That's what I was going to say, but didn't want to interrupt you. Sorry. We're going to call Assemblymember Walhooter so he can participate by phone.
I do, Kurt. Hang on one second. I'm going to put you on speakerphone, okay? You bet. You got us here, Kurt?
I do, thank you.
All right.
Okay, it's time for the voluntary Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, we need approval of the minutes of the regular meeting of February 19th. Yes.
I move we approve the minutes of February 19th.
Is there a second? It's been moved by Member Flint, seconded by Member Strand to approve the meeting minutes of February 19th. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, that passes. Now we're on to amendment and approval of today's meeting agenda. We have a motion to approve or amend.
So moved. I'll second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded to approve today's agenda. There's no amendments. Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay, the meeting agenda for today has been approved. There's no public hearings and bid awards today. Now we're on to visitors' views related to the agenda. Okay, well, can you please come forward, state your name and who you represent? We have kind of a busy agenda today, so if we could keep to like 2-3 minutes, it'd be wonderful.
Hi, my name is Joan Schultzer, and I'd like to speak to Resolution 2013-7. I've been a commercial fisherman for over 30 years, and commercial fishing, it's all about competition. We compete with each other, we compete with the weather, we compete with, fuel prices, and we compete with other species out there. And while I'm extremely sympathetic to crabbers and divers, every commercial fisheries has its nuisance animal competition. Trollers have sea lions, longliners have orcas, and gillnetters have humpbacks that rip up their nets. None of these gear types have bounties on their competing species. Bounties were an archaic, misguided policy in the last century, and there's no place for them in this century. Bounties are not scientific fisheries management tools, and legislators are not fisheries biologists. This bill would set a very bad precedent and would smear Alaska's reputation as cutting-edge fisheries managers. The biggest threat facing the crab and dive fisheries is ocean acidification. As we all know, an acidic ocean impedes the calcification of invertebrate shells. The ocean is becoming more acidic because of CO2 emissions. As China continues to build more and more coal plants, the problem's going to get way worse. Just as land forests absorb CO2 from our atmosphere, kelp forests absorb CO2 from the ocean. Sea otters are a keystone species for the nearshore environment in Southeast. They are critically important for the health of kelp forests as they eat urchins who in turn wipe out kelp. In the Aleutians, where sea otter populations have dramatically declined, the kelp forests have suffered. Kelp forests are the nurseries for finfish, so kelp forests are an important piece of the puzzle for the survival of herring and salmon. Ironically, abundant sea otters promoting kelp growth which counteracts ocean acidifying CO2, is the best bet for crabbers and divers to have any fishery in the long term. Oregon's Department of Fisheries did a study on the decline of crab stocks, and without argument, otters ate their share, but they concluded acid acidification was the culprit. Just some food for thought. When cruise ships discharge waste, the ammonia plume kills up to 50% of the plankton in its path. So 7 years later, when there's no dungeons in the pot, one can wonder if they were victims of the mixing zone of some long-gone ship. Experts agree that Southeast has not reached its carrying capacity for sea otters. The reintroduction program wasn't about putting a species back so much as restoring an ecosystem. No one alive has ever seen healthy near-shore environment in Southeast because of the near extinction of the otter in the early 1900s. The Humane Society and the Center for Biological Diversity are closely watching this bill. If it passes, it'll be really bad press for Alaskan fishermen. It'll also taint the beautiful traditional handicrafts made by Alaskan natives. Instead of art sewn with respect for the animal, it'll be stigmatized by the mercenary nature of bounties. Sea otter populations can't explode like feral cats. They only have one pup a year, and that's what left them vulnerable to bidarkas the last time. Imagine the impact of a few seiners with fast skiffs. In conclusion, there's some question about the legality of putting a state bounty on a federally protected species. I urge the Borough to hold off on considering supporting this bill until our lawyer consults the Attorney General for a legal opinion. Maybe crabbers should seriously review other solutions for a long-term fix, like a permit buyback program similar to what the seiners did. I strongly oppose this resolution. Thank you.
Okay, any other views related to the agenda? After.
So this is related to the sea otter proposal. I didn't realize it was greased and dated and ready to go today so fast. I thought this was something that may be considered a little while, but the 28th, my name's Joe Sebastian, I reside in Kupernoff. The 28th Alaskan Legislature, along with Governor Parnell, have been systematically overturning existing rights of Alaskan citizens concerning water rights, clean water, oil taxes, and others, while pandering to large corporate interests, almost specifically mining, making this one of the worst misguided state governments in Alaskan history. Just when I thought that the state had finally hit bottom, along comes a stupid idea that sets a new low, even in a state brimming over with corrupt legislation. I'm talking today about the Sea Otter $100 bounty bill utilizing native hunters. My first reaction upon hearing this on the news was, boy, this sounds stupid. Further reflection about this, I decided it's not only stupid, but it's unprofessional, unscientific, racist, and culturally destructive. Imagine my further surprise, a week later, learning the Petersburg Borough Assembly was going to sagely decide whether or not to endorse this ignorant and misguided piece of legislation as though it might contain some societal use worth considering. Well, I do understand the frustration of fishermen concerning these sea mammals and the need to find a scapegoat for their problems. This particular plan, as designed, is not the way to go. If we pause momentarily in our modern lives and look back about 220 years ago, we can see that this modern proposal has obscure overtones that free fall backwards the full 220 years back in time. Instead of bidarkas and bows and arrows, modern native hunters will be using fast skiffs, and rifles, setting off a temporary gold rush in pelts that probably won't be properly cared for or will flood the market with more fur than the craft market can possibly utilize, while making it difficult to count on any availability of furs into the future. While the state overseers count hides and dole out bounty, and whites snicker about, boy, we showed those sea otters a thing or two, we may as well pay the Sioux Indians a bounty to exterminate the buffalo because white ranchers decided that the buffalo had to go to protect the cattle.
Mr. Sebastian, this is 3 minutes. Can you kind of make your point and wrap it up, please? We do have a lot on the agenda today.
I brought a book today called The Hunters of the Stormy Sea by Harold McCracken, published in 1955. In this book, History of Russian Exploration and Settlement of Alaska contains all the gory details of native subjugation and decimation. Key to this history is the sea otter. Sea otters are responsible for the discovery of the Columbia River by Captain Robert Gray and the first circumnavigation of the world by a U.S. merchant vessel in 1790. McCracken makes the assertion that sea otters, because of their great value, led the Russians to colonize Alaska at a huge cost of capital and human lives. This directly led to the purchase of Alaska by the United States in 1869. Had Russia not been motivated by greed and lust for valuable sea otter furs, Alaska would have certainly been claimed by England and would have gone to Canada. In fact, the Canadians are still sore about it. So the lives that we all have built here are directly responsible to the gold rush in sea otter furs 200 years ago. And many of the names of our countryside are named after sea otter trading ships and captains that are still with us today. Dixon Entrance, Kendrick Bay, the Columbia River, American Bay, Mears Passage, and many others. This bill is a bad joke and a knee-jerk reaction to a complex equation. This legislation is so bereft of reason and common sense that I urge you to vote against it and condemn it as a wrong answer and the wrong approach to a complex and many-sided problem. Thank you very much.
Any more visitors' views related to the agenda? Okay, Donna, can you please step forward and to the microphone and state your name and who you represent?
My name's Donna Marsh, and I guess I'm not officially representing the advisory board for Parks and Rec, but if I say what some of them agree with, maybe it will be. But I'm in favor of promoting and maybe even expanding the use of skaters, by skaters, of the community gym. We've got a multi-million-dollar facility, and I think if we can invite and support the different groups who come and use it, I think it becomes a friendlier place. I used the analogy some time ago in a previous meeting about the community gym being perhaps compared to a commercial fishing boat where it's pretty and shiny and brand new and there's not a scratch on the fiberglass, but you take it out and use it a season or 2 or 20, you're going to get some use and wear and tear on it. But that's where the maintenance comes in. I don't know that it's going to be a maintenance nightmare because it's not like we're putting, gaping holes in the floor. There's going to be some use, there's going to be some wear. Those things have been discussed, but I would encourage continued use. We've got a great thing going here. We've got the gals on there, Ragnar rollers. I think it's a great thing. We've got the hockey players, and why not expand it to even other people? Because then I think if they realize that the community gym is a friendly place and can support their specific interests, perhaps we can even expand it to even things non-skating related. Because they will know that they have the support of Parks and Rec. And I know the Parks and Rec director, whoever it is, has a responsibility to maintain the facility. And we're grateful for the wise use of that stewardship. But I think we can work to make it a doable situation for the skaters and fiduciary responsibilities. Thank you.
Any more visitors' views related to today's agenda? Okay, seeing none, we'll move to. Oh, do we?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
My name's Dania Davis, and I don't have a voice today, but I just wanted to come and represent as a second person from the Park and Rec Board, just to let you know that when the board met with some of the representatives from the Hockey League last summer and took into account a pretty passionate plea to continue using the facility as they had been. And as it relates to today, we just wanted to show up and support that because as a group, I think our unanimous vote in support of that also generated some more interest in like programs. So since then, we've had a group of 30 to 40 plus women and now children using the facility on a regular basis. And so having that access and supporting that is important to me, and that's why I got my vote of support. And I just want to let the board or the Borough Assembly know that at the time we voted unanimously, and I think we would still support that in this case too. Thank you.
Any more views related to today's agenda? I won't be so quick to move on.
My name is Lisa Nielsen. I'm actually just representing my family. And I was going to hold off on speaking because I don't actually know what the agenda item where it says skating at the community gym refers to. So, but I would like to also say that my family began skating when we moved back to Petersburg 3 years ago. And I would take my 4 or 5 children up, whoever I could get to go up with me, and we've been skating most Sundays ever since. And I wouldn't have realized, excuse me, that that I would start exercising, 4 to 5 days a week. I used to try to come up to Parks and Rec and go on the treadmill, and that would be once or twice a year, or maybe I'd take a walk when I felt like it. And I think I spend almost 8 hours skating. Almost 8 hours skating a week right now. So it would be devastating for one tiny community person. But I know that, as these women have said, it has really grown into something much bigger. And my family would really appreciate your support to see skating, however it needs to happen, continue at the community gym. Thank you.
People with views related to today's agenda, and that item is under assembly discussion at the last part of the agenda. We'll discuss the skating in the gym. So, any more people with views related to the agenda? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to visitors' views unrelated to the agenda. Brian, can you please state who you represent and what your name is?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor and members of the Assembly. I was determined to get that right instead of saying council. I'm Brian Lynch. I'm the Executive Director of the Petersburg Vessel Owners Association. I've provided you some information on what is happening in the legislature that basically just occurred this past Thursday in regard to the Department of Fish and Game's budget that could affect commercial fisheries and the economy of Petersburg, as well as all Southeast Alaska coastal communities. That information actually is part of it of a sign-on letter that's being composed that hopefully will be out this afternoon. That's be signed on by virtually all commercial fishing organizations in Southeast, plus some processors and possibly the regional aquaculture associations. I'm not asking you necessarily to take any specific action on these issues as you did with the aerial survey funding, and I want to thank you for that, what you did here a couple meetings ago. But rather, I just wanted to keep you and the public informed on these issues, and these cuts will directly, if they occur, if they're finalized, will directly affect at least 2 of you sitting on the Assembly today. Last Thursday, the House Finance Subcommittee on Fish and Game recommended that a $550,000 cut be made from the Region 1 commercial fisheries budget. The total was over $1.5 million for fish and game in total statewide. The decrease will impact at a minimum the port sampling programs to evaluate net and troll fishery stock ID, run timing, and fishing effort. One example I'm going to use, the spring troll fishery is especially at risk because that fishery is absolutely dependent upon the coded wire tag sampling as the allowable catch is determined based on the contribution of Alaska hatchery fish. While not many PVO members are full-time trollers, I want to use this as an example of the impact a reduction in sampling could have. It's also one of the fisheries I had direct management authority over while I was with Fish and Game. The department at this time doesn't really know exactly what the total impacts will be, but likely will result in a severe reduction in harvests or could eventually result in the complete closure of that fishery depending on how this goes. The spring troll fishery is generally a $3 to $4 million fishery in ex-vessel value and about $5.5 million in first wholesale value. So basically, the effect on the southeast economy on these cuts would basically save a dime but would lose a dollar. And this doesn't even take into account the loss of nearly $250,000 in landing taxes and the possible loss of 5 or more part-time jobs in Petersburg and Wrangell area. Loss of port sampling funding will also have direct effects on net fisheries for many of the same reasons as it will affect the troll fisheries. Pink sex ratios are used to analyze run strength and set fishery openings for the purse seine fishery, and that work is done by the port sampling program. The loss of the sampling, of salmon sampling, will have ripple effects on other fisheries, shellfish, groundfish, state black cod fisheries, because the salmon sampling program is often leveraged to provide support for these other sampling efforts, that the money that goes into those other species really isn't enough to employ the people to do it, so they use the time that salmon samplers have to offset some of the shortfall there. You have issues with genetic stock ID. Right now we have an issue with the Kusnahu petition for extraterritorial jurisdiction in Upper Chatham, and there's some genetic stock ID work for sockeyes related to that. Even though that money is still intact, if we lose port samplers, we may not even have the ability to sample those fish when they come into port. Chinook biometrician support for U.S.-Canada treaty negotiators is also included in this budget cut, and this is really critical to provide support for Alaska's treaty negotiators and the ability to negotiate successfully, especially now that we're about to go through the 5-year review of the 2008 Chinook Agreement. Basically what is happening is that this money that is being cut was put into the governor's budget to backfill a loss of some federal funding. The House subcommittee deemed this wasn't necessary, I guess, or they didn't really fully understand the impacts, what this could do. But basically, in my opinion, that I've had for a number of years, was this is money that the state should have been putting in the first place. We shouldn't have relied on federal funding. We've kind of built a house of cards of federal funding in the state of Alaska, and now those couple of those cards on the bottom rung are being pulled out from under us. And this is just the start, because we have no idea what's going to happen with other budget cuts that may or may not be related to sequestration that's going on right now. So we could lose additional federal funding that's actually right now intact. Anyway, I just wanted to inform you of this, and like I said, I'm not asking for any specific action from you, but I just wanted to let people know, and also that the House Finance Committee is taking public testimony here at the LIO this coming Wednesday between 3 and 4 p.m. Anyway, thank you.
Any more visitors' views unrelated to the agenda? Okay, seeing none. The next item on the agenda is board, commission, and committee reports. I don't see any listed on the agenda. Is there any reports from any of the staff? Item 9, the consent agenda. There's one item on the consent agenda, and it's about the transient room tax. Do we have a motion to adopt the consent agenda? It's been moved by Member Strand, seconded by Member Haverlick to adopt the one item on the consent agenda. All those in favor?
Aye.
All right. Can you hear us all right, Kurt?
You bet I can hear you just fine. Thank you.
Okay. Did you want to vote on that? It's for the transient room tax.
Yes, aye also.
Okay. Thank you. Unanimous.
Yeah.
Okay. Report of other officers. The next item should be Stephanie Funt, student representative. I don't see her in the audience today, so I'm sure she's in school. Now we're on to the mayor's report. not a very lengthy report today. I was in Juneau most of last week. Had a chance to view the KTOO ferry documentary that they're coming out with. It'll be aired Easter Sunday on KTOO 360 North. I believe they said 7 or 8 o'clock. Pretty good production. It was about an hour long, and it's going to be followed up by 3 other documentaries that are more specific to communities. This one covered the whole ferry system from used to be Seattle all the way out the Aleutian chain. Thought I'd bring it up to the Assembly. They are asking for monetary support for this. I know the Borough Assembly of Wrangell, I was told, donated $2,000. So I don't think we'll take action on that today, but maybe at some point we consider it. After you see the documentary, you might think it's a worthwhile investment. Also, while in Juneau, I visited with Senator Myers. He's the co-chair of the Finance Committee. Talked to his one of his staffers, Weston Eiler, who used to be in Senator Stedman's office, and he'll be involved in writing the capital budget. Gave him a copy of our capital projects list. Talked about the police station jail facility, and they expressed interest, but we'll see where that goes. With the amount of money that is going to be coming this year, it might be hard to get anything for that. But anyway, we also met with the Lieutenant Governor, Ray Matiszewski, and I, and he asked for a copy of our capital projects list, so we gave him that, and we talked about that as well as more hydropower for our region, and just trying to make sure that he realized we're still on the map, even though if it doesn't look like it this legislative session. Attended the presentation, or there was one given at the Southeast Conference about the new ferry design. I think that's something we should really keep an eye on. That venue was not a place to comment, but the design they have, the aft part of the ship is going to have an open car deck. It has walls on either side that are from the water to the top. I think it's like 20 feet, but from the car deck to the top of the walls, it's 14 feet, I believe they said. And you could get online and view this document. And at that site, alaskaferry.com, I believe, or I could get the right website for you. You can actually make comments when they're taking the comment period. So they weren't taking into account the spray going up Lynn Canal and 80-knot winds, I guess. Also had a meeting that was cut short because we ran over our time that we were allowed in our conference room. The Cape Petersburg Intertie Steering Committee met on the 27th. The next meeting is still to be announced. At this meeting, they were talking about the cost of the project being more than what they planned earlier, which is, easy to understand. It's been years. But there's a list here, and I could give it to the clerk, and if anybody else wants to look at it. The next step is by May or June of 2013, the draft environmental impact statement will be out for public review. The public meetings on the draft EIS, June or July of this year, 2013. Preliminary final environmental impact statement and public review and comments to the Forest Service for review by September of 2013. And then they will revise and publish the final EIS and recommended ROD, recommended something, record of decision, I think, or something, by December of 2013. Appeal period till February of 2014. Hire a design engineer late 2013 or early 2014, and construction ready, assuming funding available. So that's what's happening with that Cape Petersburg Steering Committee. One more item on the mayor's report. I will be out of town from this evening till March 11th. So that's it for the mayor's report, and now we'll move to the manager's report.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Library is proceeding well. Building's dried in, windows are installed. Most of the work at this point is going on inside. We do have a bit of a wrinkle that we'll be following up with the architect on, which is that the asphalt shingles they have lined out for the facility need an outside temperature of 55 degrees before they can install them. So we need to find out if that's going to work or not. Waiting for the North Harbor bids to close on March 5th. If you see glow bouncing around, that's usually what pins and needles at this point. Quite a bit of interest in the project, and so that usually means some competitive bids, so we're looking forward to that. And the harbor continue to just kind of moving vessels out of the North Harbor to the Middle and South Harbor as we can. Putting together the tour ship schedule. Season looks about average, mid-May to early September. 85 stops by 6 different agencies at this point. The staff, Harbor Board, interesting users, all sorts of folks met with P&D engineers on a work session, discussed the 35% review of the drive-down facility. Got some changes to do to it, and the 65% review is scheduled for late May and June. So again, we'll continue through that process of kind of nailing down the design for the facility. Finance is continuing to work with all the department heads on, first step, some residential, harbor, and commercial customers on getting their utility bills caught up. We kind of review that occasionally and kind of have some conversations with folks who need a little help to get caught up to speed, kind of in conjunction with our budget process of making sure we allocate for that. Jody has the budgets out to everybody. Finance and IT are almost complete, and then we're continuing to work on the budgets for all the department heads as we get information out and they get the stuff back to us. Tara's working on the process of putting an RFP for the public art in the new library. This is actually funded entirely by private donations. No public funds or grant funds will be used. A committee of local residents will select the pieces for the new library. Arnold Lingay continues to work on the removal of the debris from the warehouse adjacent to Birch Street. He's also removed a partially collapsed gear shed that was located on Borough property on the uphill side of the street opposite the warehouse. He plans to continue to work on the remaining debris and getting it out of there, and we don't anticipate too many more closures of Birch Street while he's working. Just kind of depends on what is going on. There's some junked vehicles that we need to get out of there, and that may necessitate closing the bridge in the road for a few minutes while that happens. Seacon, which is the contractor for DOT on the downtown streets, at this point they're planning to restart the downtown project in March. Storm drain work on Excel Street will start March 11th, with paving expected to begin in April. AgPro, which is one of Seacon's concrete subs, is in town looking for locations to put their concrete batch plant for that project. So once we get that set up, we'll have a better idea on does it affect the timing of the project. Public Works continues coordinating with PIA towards the possibility of the Borough and PIA partnership on the Rasmus Inge Bridge. We've got to continue to make headway on that, and at this point, funding is not there. So we're working on the design. We've got money for that, but the actual replacement of the bridge, we're looking for as much help as we can find, and PIA potentially has some money available that could help us with that. Water treatment plant upgrades. The contractor is ASRC McGraw. Had kind of had some problems getting started, and then we're continuing to have some concerns about their ability to get it done in time for the canning season. Carl's working very closely with them, and so that if they cannot get it done or we sense that there may be a problem, we'll basically shut them down and resume the project in the fall. We can't afford to have that entire filter train down during the season, so something we're having to keep an eye on. And the wastewater pump station 5, this is the really large pump station that gets everything up to the wastewater treatment plant. The bid opening was last week. We just had one bidder at $757,000, which is a sizable amount over the project budget. Our budget was $550 to $650. We have not awarded the bid at this point as we try to figure out a way to get it back within budget before we pursue it. So, and that's it unless there's questions.
Any questions of the manager on his report? Leo, is there a microphone back there? Okay.
Yes, there is. Just a quick update on the shingles for the library roof. They are shingling right now, and it isn't 55 degrees out, but the architect approved a cold weather method where if they add additional mastic where the seams go, that should work just fine. So that is proceeding. I just found that out. I apologize
Great
for
news.
that.
Thanks, Leah.
Thanks, Leo. Any other questions of the manager? I guess I have one under the upgrade on the water system. I mean, that's in their contract to have the completion date by time, so if we have to shut them down, it's not...
Carl, if I answer this wrong, jump in. The mayor asked if it's in McGraw's contract on the water treatment plant that had to be done by a certain time because of our water requirements during the summer. And the answer is yes, we can shut them down and, let them know. We have some drop dead dates associated with that project that it must be done or they have to stop because we do need both filter drains. I get that right?
That's correct. Okay, thanks. Just I figured that would be the case, but I just wanted to ask that question. Next item, unfinished business. And, the borough is the first item there. The Juneau appeal has been filed. They have filed their appellant brief. Our attorneys, Sarah and Jim, are reviewing and will be providing comment and a written response by March 29th, 2013. At this time, they still feel fairly confident that things will go in our favor on our boundary dispute here with Juneau. Future transition items, a written response to the questionnaires provided to the existing advisory boards to obtain their opinions on whether to retain the boards, committees, as a borough is due back to the administration office by March 8th. The results of this feedback will be compiled in a summary document for assembly review and discussion at our next meeting on March 18th. Redistricting, there's no new information. No new information at this time of the SEPA and D. Hiddle and Associates O&M report. That moves us on to under unfinished business, ordinance 2013-4. And that is an ordinance implementing an area-wide transient room tax in the amount of 4% throughout the Petersburg Borough. And this is the third and final reading. So we need a motion to move that into the third reading.
I so move.
Second. It's been moved by Member Strand, seconded by Member Haverlick to move ordinance 2013-4 into its third and final reading. Any discussion? Seeing no discussion, will the clerk please call the roll?
John Haverlick,
Yes.
John Hogue,
Yes.
Kurt,
Yes.
Sue,
Yes.
Nancy,
Yes.
Cindy,
Yes.
Mark.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, it passes 7-0. The next item under unfinished business is E, and it's the assembly confirmation of criteria to be used during the police chief search, interview and negotiation stages. The staff continues to work on hiring and interview criteria for the upcoming recruitment of a new police chief. A criteria update has been made part of this assembly package for the assembly review. There are several items that require assembly consideration at this time to keep the process on track. The main three items, I guess, are establish an annual salary. The staff is recommending $70,000 to $95,000. Approve reimbursable moving expense up to $15,000. Appoint an assembly member to the formal interview board. That's more than three items. It's longer than that if you go to the long version of it. Authorize up to $6,500 per month for a temporary contract for an interim police chief if necessary. The assembly must also be prepared to conduct a special session near the end of April to affirm any hiring recommendations that may be made. Finally, because of the time of year, a new police chief may come to town in June or July. Assembly and community members are asked to keep their eyes and ears open for suitable housing. We know that time of the year it might be hard to find a place to live. So is there any comments by the assembly members on this proposed method with the salary range and so on?
Mr. Mayor, my only question is about reimbursable moving expenses and how that figure was arrived at. I'm not sure that that would be adequate if somebody comes from a long distance.
Not sure, if Mr. Mayor, if I may?
Yes.
Not sure it is as well. It's kind of a standard number that's been used by the borough and prior to the borough of the city in the past. And I mean, I can speak to my personal situation, I guess, is most current. And, you know, in my contract, it was up to 20,000, and that's tight. But it just depends on how the assembly wants to approach that.
And I'm remembering the cost to government when I was a federal employee and moved to Petersburg, and it seems like it exceeded this amount, and I was moving from Juneau, so something to consider.
Mr. Mayor, do we need a motion on
Member
this?
Hoag, I would think we'd have to have a motion to accept this, and maybe we should do that, and then we can have better discussion on it. Thank you, Member Lakadakis. Would you like to make a motion?
Well, I move that the borough adopt the recommended salary criteria of 70 to 95,000, increase the relocation expenses to $20,000, approve up to $6,500 a month to hire an interim chief if necessary, and I think that's all we really need to do right now, unless I'm missing something.
Okay, Member Hoag made a motion to approve the $70,000 to $95,000 salary range, as we see written here, but increase the relocation amount to $20,000 and approve $6,500 per month for a temporary chief of police until we get a permanent one hired. Is there a second to that?
Second.
Seconded by Member Flint. So any discussion?
I have a question. Does this minimum 3-year period stay in the amendment?
Are you talking about the moving
raising
fees
the
that has
moving
to be
expenses to $20K? He still has to stay here 3 years.
I would think that would sure stay in the contract. I believe that's been the way we've had them written in the past.
Okay.
When we,
Yes, sir.
So any more discussion on this item?
Mr. Mayor, if I may?
Yes.
The only thing that, after this item's approved on, you might want to consider discussing which assembly member wants to sit on, or two or more, on the interview board.
Good point. Okay, well, maybe we'll address the monetary part of it first, and then we'll move on to assembly members that want to sit on the selection committee. So will the clerk please call the, no more discussion? Will the clerk please call the roll?
Kurt?
Yes.
Nancy?
Yes.
Sue?
Yes.
Cindy?
Yes.
John Hoag?
Yes.
Mark?
Yes.
John Haverly?
Yes.
It passes unanimously. And now we have one other thing we need to discuss, and I don't know if that would take a motion, but is there any members of the assembly that would be willing to be on this selection committee, I guess is what we'd call it?
Well, my problem, Mr. Mayor, is I'm 6-8 months ago pre-committed to being out of town during when I'm told that the process will take place. Otherwise, I'd love to be on it. So I don't think I can.
I would as well, but I'll be fishing, so. Member
Mr. Mayor, I
Lakadakis?
could.
Okay. Cindy Lakadakis has, Assemblymember Lakadakis has expressed interest. Is that good with all the other assembly members?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Seeing no objections, Member Lakadakis will be on this committee. Okay. Reconsideration of Thomas Bay Authority's request for a budget amendment. We need a motion to move into this discussion.
So move.
Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved by Member Haverlick, seconded by Member Strand to reconsider the Thomas Bay's request for a salary raise. Discussion?
Go ahead, John.
Well, I'm responsible for this coming back, so I would like to thank the city manager and Joe for providing us, or at least with the opportunity to review a lot of material about SEPA, Thomas Bay, and the whole process. I have come out of that review with a question that has been raised by others is, frankly, why does Thomas Bay exist? And I recognize I'm told there are people in the audience that can speak to that and may want to, but SEPA owns the physical facilities. They're not being run by SEPA, they're being run by Thomas Bay. We are contributing money to do that when that should be SEPA's responsibility. I think the discussion needs to begin for next year is why we are contributing anything to Thomas Bay and whether Thomas Bay should continue to exist. I think that's a discussion that needs to be had with Thomas Bay, with SEPA, with Wrangell at least, to have that. That all being said, I'm as uncomfortable this time as I was 2 weeks ago with using an increase in insurance costs, health insurance costs, as the vehicle to bring this to a head. I think we should approve the health insurance costs of $5,000 for the rest of the year. And I note that in the document we were provided on pages 18 and 19 of our packet, that every member, including Joe Nelson, of the Thomas Bay Board seemed to approve a motion to ask us for the money, and so I'm a little uncertain as to why there would be an internal recommendation not to approve the money given that. So I would move that we do approve the additional $5,000 for the Thomas Bay, but I would also, on a separate matter, suggest we start holding a work session, because I see no reason to fund any utility money for Thomas Bay next year. I don't want to see Wrangell losing jobs and people losing employment, but it strikes me that Thomas Bay, if they're running this plant for SEPA, who owns it, should be negotiating with SEPA for a budget that covers the full amount of running it, and we shouldn't be having to contribute more money for that.
Okay.
So that's
Any
my 2
more
cents on
comments on this issue?
I have a couple, but I don't know if I want to wade there. I did want to clear up one point, and Mr. Southland, in the paperwork that we were given, it talks about the money that was invested in ARECA, and none of us know what that entity is.
ARECA is a command.
Can you please step up and speak to the microphone? Identify yourself, please. Paul, Mr. Southland.
Mr. Mayor, Assembly members, Paul Southland, General Manager, Thomas Bay Power Authority. ARECA is an insurance management agency. It's a co-op agency of governments within the state of Alaska that Thomas Bay in the 1980s was a member of. I'll pass out to you now the response that we received from ARECA. We have an investment with them in approximately $250,000. They're studying the dispersal of that, how that can be done, and that money won't be available to us in this fiscal year. The soonest it would be available to us would be September.
Any questions of Mr. Southland at this point from any Assembly members? I guess not, Paul. Thanks. I know we received a letter in this packet from the mayor of Wrangell on a different subject from David Jack, and that meeting was on the 26th last week. So I just, out of curiosity, I asked if the Wrangell Assembly had taken any action on this, and the answer I got was no. So I'm still kind of concerned about the amendment to the contract and the raise we're talking about giving them. I agree with Mr. Hoag about the discussion that needs to take place, and I guess that was spurred from the D. Hiddle report that SEPA asked, and it was the O&M contracts for not only the Tyee hydro facility, which is the facility I believe Thomas Bay Power Authority is responsible for, and then the KPU, Ketchikan Public Utilities, which does the maintenance on Swan Lake, the hydro project down by the Ketchikan area. So I'm sure that discussion will come up in the near future, especially when you consider the letter that came from the mayor of Wrangell, Mr. Jack, about the memorandum of understanding we're going to talk about later, to that by 2014 the municipalities can ask to, or look into it and see if it's a good idea to sell or buy these hydro projects from SEPA. I guess we'd have to have more information, but I think we have a pretty good deal personally. We 6.8 cents a kilowatt hour wholesale price, and don't have any liability on the infrastructure, the intertie from Swan Lake to Tyee or the facilities. So I guess that'll be a discussion we'll have. So anyway, what we're talking about now, I guess, is whether we want to expend another $5,000 this year for wages for employees at Thomas Bay Power Authority. That's just my opinion.
Benefits.
Mr. Havlicek? Benefits, yeah.
Mr. Mayor, I would be against this, and not because of wage increase or that this is connected to any insurance funds. I just believe strongly that we need to stick within our budget. And to be honest with you, unless there's an unbelievable critical issue on any of the upcoming budgets, I will not vote for any increases. And I think that, a person has a budget and they need to live within it.
Any more comments from the Assembly members?
Mr. Mayor, Kurt Wallhuter here.
Yes, Member Wallhuter.
This is probably more of a legal question, and maybe Mr. Hope could answer that for us. Is because this is written into the contract, what is the possibility of them challenging this in court, and what would the liability be towards us if we had to try to defend our decision in court?
Well, Kurt, if I go ahead and answer that, I assume, and I have not read their contract, but I would assume that with the agreement between IBEW and Thomas Bay, that the authority has to extend the benefits to the dependent that resulted from the marriage of the office manager, if I've got all that right. I assume that's the answer, and if it isn't, if it's just...
May I address that?
Mr. Southland, maybe after we get done with our discussion amongst ourselves.
I assume that's the case, so I don't think the borough, Thomas Bay can obviously cut, they have to make the decision as to how to live within their budget, and if they are assuming they're legally responsible to fund that, I don't see a direct liability to the borough. I see Thomas Bay may have to reduce, cut budgets another direction, but I don't like, I just don't like the idea of using this as a vehicle to say you're going to have to make some cuts elsewhere. I think it does present liability issues to Thomas Bay. That's my guess.
Did you hear that, Member Wallhuter?
I did. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, and I think that answers my question. It sounds to me as if I understood him correctly that if they were to challenge us, there would be no liability on our part. They have to learn to live within their budget. If I understand that correctly, is that's an assumption? Is that true?
That's my tentative opinion. I would like, to see the contract, but that's my best guess at this moment.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much. I'm done.
Any more questions of the Assembly members or comments? I'd like to make one comment. I respect Mr. Hoag's experience as a attorney. I think our decisions should be made on information we get from our borough attorney. I just wanted to bring that to light.
I have no quarrel with that, Mark.
I know you are. Just wanted to bring it up. And it's probably why you're hesitant to discuss it. But under recommendations on this item, that the RECA funds could be used, maybe, or then there was request $10,000 adjustment to the net non-net billables, I guess that's called, what it stands for, to be funded equally between Petersburg and Wrangell, or authorize general manager to reduce office manager position to 32 hours a week. So those are some, the three recommendations. And Mr. Southland, you had a comment?
I was only.
Can you, if it's, you need to get it on the record, please.
I was just going to respond to the question. Our IBEW contract does require that we extend the same benefits to all of our members. And I did want to respond, Mr. Nelson, when I was here at the last meeting, deemed that this wasn't an emergency, but what I'm passing out is an Office of Management and Budget definition of what a budget emergency is. And Thomas Bay is, in fact, a department of the cities of Wrangell and Petersburg. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Southland.
Mr. Mayor, is it time for a motion to resolve this matter?
Sure, I think, didn't we have a motion to adopt it? Yeah.
The motion was to reconsider.
To reconsider. So I guess the motion in my mind would mean to reconsider the expenditure of $5,000 from the Petersburg Borough for their half of the $10,000 increase for staff at Thomas Bay Power Authority. Any more discussion?
What does a yes vote or a no vote mean on this?
I would interpret it as a yes vote means we're willing to spend another $5,000. Am I correct in that assumption?
Yes.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Okay, any more discussion? Seeing none, will the clerk please call the roll?
Sue?
No.
John Havlick?
No.
John Hogue?
Yes.
Kurt?
Yes.
Nancy?
Yes.
Cindy?
No.
Mark?
No.
Does not pass.
It fails 4-3. Okay, and that brings us to new business. A resolution number 2013-7, a resolution in support of Senate Bill number 60, introduced in the 28th Legislature of the State of Alaska for an act entitled an act relating to sea otter population management by implementation of a bounty on sea otters. Need a motion so we can discuss it further? No motions from the floor? Well, that's easy. Seeing no motion, we won't discuss the resolution. Okay, we have a letter for authorization to submit a motion to intervene in the proceedings of an application for preliminary permit filed by Hydro Development LLC for the Cascade Creek Hydroelectric Project, number P-143360. A draft letter has been prepared seeking to intervene in the above-named project. The closing paragraph of the letter sums up the reasons for the motions to intervene, as Hydro Development LLC presumes to use lands, facilities, and services managed, owned, and operated by the Petersburg Borough. As owners of these lands, facilities, and services, the Petersburg Borough therefore has interests not represented by any other parties to this proceeding. So, do we have a motion to approve the sending of this letter to FERC?
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved by Member Haverlick, seconded by Member Flint, to authorize this letter to be sent to FERC from the Borough of Petersburg. Any discussion? Will the clerk please call the roll on this?
John Hogue?
Yes.
Kurt?
Yes.
Cindy?
Yes.
John Havlick?
Yes.
Mark?
Yes.
Sue?
Yes.
Nancy?
Yes.
Okay, it passes unanimously, if my counting is right. Authorization, item C under new business, is authorization to proceed in the request for proposals for general counsel, legal services. An RFP has been prepared by retiring city attorney Paul Dillon that outlines the services required and qualifications necessary from an individual or firm to provide the borough with general legal counsel. If approved by the Assembly, proposals will be accepted until we have to determine that date, and proposals received will be evaluated by Attorney Dillon, Manager Giesbrick, and Clerk O'Rear, with tentative contracts award at the Assembly meeting of, need to pick that date as well, to be determined by the Assembly. So, need a motion to authorize this proposal, RFP, with dates on it.
I so move.
Second.
Been moved by Member Hoag, seconded by Member Flint to authorize this RFP. So I guess discussion.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
I suggest the city manager fill in some dates for us.
Okay, that's a good idea.
Can do that.
We need a release date and a deadline for submission and opening date and time.
Don't have a calendar here. Debbie, can you help me out here?
Yes, I can.
Over here is
So we are looking
Turn
at.
it way far.
Here we go, Steve. Oh, this is 2012.
Thank you.
It's in there also.
Here we go. Bear with us a minute.
Well, we're releasing it today. Give us a week to get it posted. I would suggest that we at least give folks, a full 3 weeks to a month to review it. If that's the case, we could do a deadline of submission. I'm trying to think. We did a deadline of, let's say, April 4th.
A month.
That gives them a full month. And we then put it on the agenda for the for April 15th to go over and review basically hear the recommendation of the committee.
Awarded on the 15th?
The Assembly would. We would have a recommendation to you.
15th of April.
Yes.
So
Does that work?
close of applications would be at 5 p.m. on April 4th.
Correct.
So,
And you may, we just threw Kathy and Paul and I in the mix. It doesn't have to be the three of us. If anybody from this group wants to take the place of that, or any of us.
You're the ones dealing with them.
Well, so do you, and that's why I wanted to make
No,
that
I think
offer. I
if
mean,
you-
we just put those names in there, but
You folks deal with it.
all right.
okay, any more discussion by the Assembly on this matter? The RFP for legal counsel? Seeing none, will the clerk call the roll?
Cindy,
Yes.
John Hoag,
Yes.
John Hathaway,
Yes.
Mark,
Yes.
Nancy,
Yes.
Kurt,
Yes.
Sue.
Yes.
Okay, it passes unanimously. The next item is D, Crane Dock Approach Widening at the direction of the City Council last fall. Harbor Master Wolin asked P&D to prepare a proposal for engineering services on the Crane Dock Approach Widening project. The proposal provides professional services through the bid phase of the project. So we have a motion to approve.
I move.
Second?
Second.
It's been moved by Member Lakadakis, seconded by Member Haverlick to have P&D move forward with the design plans for the crane dock expansion.
Mr. Mayor, if I may, and Glow, correct me if I say anything wrong. The reason, and this was brought up by Glow to do this, is what our approach is to actually bid this with the drive down to save the borough money when it comes to you get hit real hard on mobilization for contractors, and by including this in the drive down project, it potentially saves us some money. Glow, did I get that right?
That sounded correct to me, so. And I believe, after talking with P&D, when they presented the 35% design on the drive-down dock, if it's completed within the same scope of the project for the drive-down dock, it would be completed by December of 2014, Christmas
Yes.
time?
Yep, December 2014.
All kinds of things happening on the waterfront. It's a good
Yes.
thing.
Yes, $21 million worth of projects in our little burg.
Okay, resolution 2013-8. Oh, we need to vote.
We need to vote.
Sorry. I assumed it was a vote. Got me.
That was my fault for
Will the
interrupting
clerk
you.
call the roll?
John Hogue,
Yes.
Sue,
Yes.
Cindy,
Yes.
John Havlet,
Yes.
Mark,
Yes.
Kurt,
Yes.
Nancy.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, passes unanimously. Now we can move to item E. Resolution 2013-8, a resolution endorsing the proposed expansion of Swan Lake Reservoir and urging the state for funding the project. We have a motion to adopt.
I move that we adopt Resolution 213-8.
Second.
Second. It's been moved by Member Hoag, seconded by Member Flint to adopt Resolution 2013-8. Any discussion?
Is this seeking money from the state, or is the city going to put up money for, or because of our SEPA membership or whatever?
If I understand it correctly, what this is SEPA asking for $13 million, $12.3 million to fund this project in the 2014 capital budget. And what it is to raise the Swan Lake Dam, which is part of the SEPA system, by
Right.
4 feet. It'll eliminate, or will displace 12,000 megawatt hours of winter diesel generation, 800,000 gallons of diesel fuel annually. That's what's predicted, and it's already tied to the grid. So it's SEPA's recommendation. The City of Ketchikan Council and the Ketchikan Borough Assembly both have passed resolutions in support of this, and that's why it's before us today. See if we can get our support.
And I understand all that, but they're requesting money that would come from the state, not from us.
Yes.
Correct. State grant.
Mr. Mayor, I only have one comment on the resolution, and that is the first whereas is one that is backward-looking, whereas the rest of the statements are forward-looking and make the case for why we would want to expand Swan Lake. And I would recommend we strike that first statement.
Okay, I believe this was kind of drafted after Ketchikan, but we don't have to follow that verbatim, so that,
I don't think it has anything to do with the case, so it doesn't need to be included.
any more discussion? Okay, well, is that an amendment to the motion then? Okay, we have an amendment to the motion to adopt Resolution 213-8, and that amendment is to remove the first whereas, and it says a decrease in timber harvesting and changes in fisheries management regimes in the 1990s resulted in significant losses of jobs, population, and school enrollment in Petersburg, and that is the first whereas. Is there a second to that amendment to the motion?
Second.
Been seconded by Member Strand. The motion was initiated by Member Lakadakis. So any discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, will the clerk call the roll on the amendment?
Cindy,
Yes.
John Hogue,
Yes.
Sue,
Yes.
Mark,
Yes.
John Havlet,
Yes.
Nancy,
Yes.
Kurt,
Yes.
Okay, the amendment passes unanimously. Now we're back to the main motion to adopt Resolution 2013-8. Any more discussion on the main motion? At the bottom, it just says who this will be circulated to the governor and our senators in the region, and the South Alaska Energy Authority's Executive Director, Sarah Fisher-Goad. So, will the clerk please call the roll?
Sue,
Yes.
John Havlet,
Yes.
Nancy,
Yes.
John Ho,
Yes.
Cindy,
Yes.
Mark,
Yes.
Kurt.
Yes.
Thank you.
Passes unanimously. Now we're on to communications. I was going to add under that item what Mr. Lynch talked about earlier, so we don't need to reiterate that. But if a person wants to, you can get a list of the dates to testify on the House resolution to reduce the state's fish and game budget for Southeast, and that's coming right up.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
I'm wondering if we shouldn't encourage our Economic Development Committee to lobby a little bit for this too. It sounds like it could potentially really hurt us economically here, so I think we need to get a lot of support for the fish and game budget.
I agree, and if you look at some of the things that'll cut, one of the things they're talking about cutting is $1 million from the Alaska State Marketing Institute budget, as well as what Mr. Lynch talked about earlier. Yeah, Alaska Seafood Marketing Institute. It could really have an effect on our fisheries in the region. So, any more ideas? Should we try to get PEDC engaged in the? Is that what you'd like to see, Member Flint?
Us and them should be
Right. I agree.
working on
Mayor,
this.
I would agree that perhaps a motion should be made for the borough to oppose these cuts and send a letter under your signature so stating.
Okay.
I would second that.
Okay. The motion's been made by Member Hoag, seconded by Member Haverlick to send a letter to the governor's office and whoever else would be appropriate to object to this House bill cutting the state budget for fish and game. So, any more discussion on the item? Clerk, call the roll.
Sue,
Yes.
Cindy,
Yes.
John Ho,
Yes.
Nancy,
Yes.
Mark,
Yes.
John Haverlick,
Yes.
Kurt.
Yes.
Okay, it passes unanimously, and will the city clerk draft a letter and get a hold of Liz Cabrera and work together with her on that, please?
Yes, I will.
Thank you. Okay, council discussion items. Recognitions. This agenda item is reserved to acknowledge individuals, groups, departments, agencies, or anyone for their contributions toward the betterment of the Petersburg community. Is there any recognitions by assembly members or staff? Sandy?
Yes, Mayor.
You have a microphone there?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
I would like to acknowledge Guardian Flight for sponsoring our EMT2 course. If you remember, during budget session last year, we cut our EMT2 course out of the budget and said if we didn't find some source of funding, we'd come for a supplemental. And Guardian Flight stepped up and sponsored the class, which was tremendous. And we had the instructor stay in the fire station, so we saved in housing. And she was able to shop and cook there. In January and February, we did our EMT1 course. We had 6 students complete that course and did testing at the end of February. And we had 13 people take the EMT2 course in February also. So in January and February, we had EMS people donate 1,564.75 hours for the EMT1 class, the EMT2 class, ambulance calls, and drill attendance. So I just want to put kudos out to the EMS folks. And then I don't want to leave out search and rescue and fire, and then the junior program. We have high school students still participating in the junior program. And I just want the community to recognize how much people are giving to our community for no cost. So they're not being paid for this. It's out of the goodness of their heart, and it's saving the community a tremendous amount of money if we had to pay people to do this. So I'd just like to say thanks to all their time.
Thank you, Sandy. Any more recognitions by assembly or staff? Mr. Hayes.
Just this past weekend, the high school and Little League have been working on a couple of different projects up at the ball field, specifically a covered bleacher area. And we had some specific volunteers that had really no purpose to come and volunteer their efforts this weekend. I just wanted to just give a little shout out and thank them for. Ty Cummings and Ted Sandhofer came up and gave us a lot of guidance on how to build the structure. And then the Coast Guard actually put together about 6 to 7 different people to come up, and they spent 3 hours on Friday and then during the rain on Saturday from 8 a.m. until about 3 o'clock helping us build that structure. And so although we didn't get it finished, without their help we wouldn't be as far along as we are. And so those volunteers just deserve to have a thank you, and constantly, as they're seen on the streets, just a big hug and tell them that we appreciate their hard work.
Okay, thank you. Donnie Hayes. Mr. Havlicek.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, I just wanted to send a thank you out to Nicole McMurrin as she's running this Talk of Petersburg, or and Let's Talk Petersburg, and it was just nice to see a group of about a dozen people getting together to look at problems and solutions and how to make Petersburg better. It was so I'd like to thank her for coordinating that and for sticking with that.
Okay, thank you very much. Member Flint.
I'd like to send a thank you out to Vera Gadima. I saw her yesterday picking up bags of garbage out on the Libby Strait stretch ditch there, and it looks so nice today. So thank you, Vera.
Thank you.
I just wanted to add one point to John's. Nicole is working with the Petersburg Community Foundation and with Jessica Yeremia of the library and cooperating in that project. So all of those folks should be recognized.
Right. Very good. Any more recognitions? Okay, moves us on to council discussion item B. The Assembly discussion on public notice posting criteria. February 9th, we had a letter from George Cole, Secretary for the Concerned Citizens of the Unorganized Borough, CCUB, requested 3 specific changes to the borough's public noticing policy as expressed in Resolution 2013-1. The Assembly postponed any action on the request at the February 19th meeting until the second meeting in March, giving more time for the Assembly to discuss the request and other residents to express their ideas. The letter requested add Papke's Landing Boardwalk as a public notice posting area, and we're still discussing that. Designate a specific harbor posting area. That's been done. The harbor master has picked a location right by the harbor master shack outside the door. The office doesn't have to be open for people to view the postings. So we could strike 2 off of our list if that's acceptable. Spell out what constitutes a public notice and who is responsible for posting and removing the notices. And to my knowledge, we're still under discussion on that item. Any discussion from Assembly members on this?
I'd like to hear from the city manager and staff on what their recommendations are on this issue.
Steve?
I can. Is there anybody in the audience that wanted to weigh in on this? Okay. What our plan was originally was that we were going to utilize the trees for the Papke's area. From the standpoint, it gives us the ability, we can fax the notices to them, and they were willing to put it up on their bulletin board, and it allows us a certain amount of flexibility in that we don't have to spend money by sending staff out there to do this. They were willing to do that for us. I don't live out there, so I want to be careful about what I say is appropriate and what isn't, but that sounds to me like a very acceptable method of posting this. It's in the area. Sounds like we've got the harbor squared away. And on number 3, I think kind of, which is what constitutes a public notice, I think that we were going to use our standard issue there. We're talking about ordinances, something that involves, where there's going to be a formal vote and making sure that folks have adequate time to come in and weigh in on that. I understand from Mr. Cole's perspective that the trees is not acceptable to him. So I want to acknowledge that.
Is there any way to find a volunteer to do the postings, say on the boardwalk at Papke's Landing?
Mr. Mayor, I did volunteer to do that at the last meeting.
Okay. Then is there any reason not to add the boardwalk as long as we've got a willing volunteer, at least as long as that volunteer exists?
Well, there was a There is a posting place there now, but it's at the end of the pier before you go down the ramp, and the facility out there is a little old, and I don't think it gets shoveled in the wintertime, so to expect a city or borough employee to drive down there and walk out the ramp and post a notice, I think would be, asking a little bit too much, but I know Member Lakadakis offered to do it in the interim.
I would have a little trepidation about putting it into the resolution, but I'd be more than happy to do that.
Say that, the resolution will use the trees with the facts, and then we will make efforts to get it posted out on the boardwalk as can be done.
These are all posted by the door of the post office also, and I know they all go there to get their mail. Anybody who lives at Papke's or beyond and uses Papke's dock. So I think between that and the website and the harbor, I think we're pretty well covered.
Okay.
One of my, if I may, I'm sorry, and boy, I appreciate, Assembly Member Lakadakis on that. One of our concerns was, John, you may want to weigh in on this. We post it there sometimes, but not all. Are we running a risk of, weather starts to keep it from being an issue, and now suddenly we can't post there. We'd like to be really consistent when it comes to this stuff. It will always be in these locations. That's the only concern.
That makes sense to me. Any more comments?
Well,
Member Strand?
His concern is for things the borough might post. Is that, do we know, if somebody else posts something there, are they required to post it at all sites, like the assembly is required, like the borough is required?
I'm not sure if the fishing game, I know they
no,
post.
No, I'm not speaking for I'm talking about borough-related issues. If, I just would like that clarified,
Can anybody answer?
Are we the only ones that are required to post notices everywhere?
Specific sites that we have chosen, I think, and that's what we're trying to do here. And, in this discussion we're having today, it's stated that we will give more time. We won't make a decision until the second meeting in March, which would be the 18th. So maybe at this point we could, well, I guess we have more time to decide if we want to designate Papke's Landing Boardwalk as a public notice posting area. Personally, I think we have the areas of the immediate areas around the service area 1 and the main hub to get out to Duncan Canal, Keene Channel, and the trees, you drive by there to get to Papke's Landing. So that's my opinion.
So this site would be in addition to the trees or instead of the trees?
At this point, addition to, I believe. Is that correct, Mr. Giesbrick?
Entirely up to the assembly. At this point, we've set it up to be at the trees, the harbor, here, the post office, on the website. But the assembly can determine that. If you want to have additional places, we can do that. And my hesitation on the boardwalk was more so just making it clear that we potentially could not promise that it's always going to be there, kind of weather dependent.
And I think that's an important point, Mr. Mayor, if I may ask Mr. Giesbrecht, do we have the requirement to also post these kinds of notices in the pilot? It alludes to it, but it doesn't say it in this resolution. And it seems like other agencies use the pilot legal notices, and that's considered sufficient.
Can you speak to that?
Our ordinances are posted in the pilot.
Okay, thank you.
Any more discussion?
Mr. Mayor, I just asked staff to bring a resolution using the places they recommend, and not in the resolution not to mention the boardwalk at Papke's. And so I think if there's an occasional posting there on a voluntary basis, that does not create a liability as far as I can see.
Okay. And I think the concern of Mr. Cole was that we passed this first resolution and we didn't take into consideration the Pappy's location, but so that we've already passed a resolution, but I guess we're addressing his concerns again, and we'll do that on the 18th of March. Is that acceptable to the Assembly? Okay, any more discussion on this item of posting criteria? Okay, now it brings us to the most attended subject of the day on the agenda, and that is item C, and that's skating at the community gym. And Mr. Havlick, would you like to speak to this?
Sure. Actually, I think we should have something conflictual every meeting. This way we can draw a crowd. I think that's a good way to go. But the reason, two reasons for, and I don't know the answers to this, on skating in the gym. One is I know we're going to be putting about $25,000 into redoing the community gym. And if skating continues, I don't know how often we're going to have to generate $25,000 to keep redoing that floor. So that's an unknown that I need to because it's an expense, and as I said earlier on the Thomas Bay thing, I'm not going to vote for any increases. The other thing is there have been injuries, and what's our liability knowing that there have been significant injuries? What's the city's liability for continuing an activity that is known to cause injuries?
Any other Assembly members like to comment on skating at the community gym situation? I was just going to, yeah. Mr. Hayes, would you like to comment on the programs in the gym?
A couple of things. First of all, the $25,000 is something that needs to be spent to redo the floor. It hasn't been done since 1991, when the floor was actually built. That $25,000, just so you guys understand, goes towards resanding the floors, replacing broken slats, and then also repainting all the lines, and then putting 2 new coats of lacquer on it. Yearly, the maintenance on that is about $5,000 to put 2 new coats of lacquer on, which should be done every single year. At least yearly, if not bi-yearly. But right now, it's just happening yearly. So the suggested amount of time for the $25,000 redo of the gym floor is actually supposed to be every 8 to 10 years is when we're supposed to do that. We've definitely gone over that point. The floor is not in a perfect position right now, but I can't say 100% right now whether that's due to hockey or roller skating or those types of things on the floor, or the fact that it just hasn't been done since 1991. And so I do not see the $25,000 being like a yearly thing, but in 10 years I will be budgeting for it to be done, so that way I can keep up to the standards of maintenance that is required on that floor. Does that answer the question for number one?
Pretty much. My only concern is the activity causing damage that's costing us more money?
It's a hard thing to say because of the fact that the floor hasn't been done since 1991. I don't have...
So basically it's an unknown?
It is an unknown.
Okay.
I do have beliefs, but it is an unknown at this point. Okay. We won't be able to know that until we redo the floor and we're able to, take a much closer view and, look at that situation as it comes along.
Member Lakadakis?
There was another point that you brought up, Lonnie, when we had our discussion, and that was the wall protection that you were planning on installing, and that might be worth sharing.
Correct. The other concern that I have as far as hockey in the gymnasium goes is protection of the walls. The hockey puck is a hard object, does tend to shoot past the cage itself numerous times. We do take a fair amount of damage from those hockey pucks to the walls. One of the things that I asked for in my last capital projects is to purchase nets that could be dropped down on both ends of the gymnasium, so that way the hockey pucks could hit those nets and not actually be doing direct damage to the walls. So that's something that I am trying to find grants for, whether it be through capital improvement projects or through outside grants as well.
I'd just like to observe that it seems like the reason we have a gym floor is so there's a certain amount of activity on it. And $25,000 spent in 22 years of activities doesn't seem seems reasonable to me. So I think if this will promote additional activity on the activity floor designed for activity, it would be good. It would be a positive step.
Any more comments from assembly members?
I have a
Member
question,
Lakadaka?
actually. I was curious to know if you have some sense of how many people use the facility and what proportion of that are folks that are skating-related activities.
There's a large population that uses that community gym. If we understand the purpose of that community gym, it was actually built as, number one, as part of the school district. So they get first use of that facility. So throughout the day, you have your kindergartners, your first, second, third graders, all the way up to your sixth graders using that gymnasium for their PE classes. So you take all those kids using it on a daily basis, Monday through Friday, they're using it. Then the high school, middle school sports programs have first shot at that from 3 o'clock until 6 o'clock in the evening to use it. We have track and field using that gymnasium. We have softball and baseball using that gymnasium. We have basketball using that gymnasium, volleyball. Pretty much all of the sports that go through the high school and junior high use that. And then during the evenings, we have one night of indoor soccer that is done through adults. We also run our own programs in there. Basketball, we're starting an indoor soccer program. We also have, of course, hockey using it 2 nights a week. We have the roller derby ladies using it twice a week. We've got adult women's volleyball using it. There's a basketball group of women that are trying to find some time in there to be able to use it. We have a lot of groups that use that community gymnasium, not just the roller sports, but as a whole. I did not bring those specific numbers with me, but it's being very well used.
Any more questions? Assembly members, Mr. Giesbrecht, you have?
Not an assembly member, but I
No.
do if
Manager.
it's open
Go
to
ahead.
me. 2 issues. Assembly member Haverlick asked about the liability. We did check with our insurance carrier. The city carries general liability insurance is basically an umbrella policy. These type of injuries are covered under that. That does not mean that somebody couldn't decide to sue us, despite us having insurance, and that we can't protect ourselves from that other than having the insurance policy and facility use agreements that say you basically use the facility at your own risk. I'm sure John could speak to. There's not much we could do to say that would make us totally immune from a lawsuit, but we've done everything we need to do as a city to protect us from that perspective. The second piece is related to cost, and this has nothing to do with skating. It has to do with use of the facility. Over time, we will have a hard time keeping costs from not going up in that facility. That has nothing. Skating provides a certain amount of wear and tear, but so does basketball or little kids on tricycles. And the cost of repairing those floors get more expensive every year. Has nothing to do with necessarily more wear and tear as it does just the cost of materials, and people charge more. So, to speak to that issue, Assemblymember Haverlick's correct in the sense that if, in fact, we use the facility more for whatever reasons, though, it will drive costs. And I can't sit here and make a promise that we're always going to have that facility at a flat budget line. It just makes it really difficult to do that. So,
Mr. Mayor, I just would rely on staff. If any particular use is causing undue damage, I assume we'll hear about it. And until then, I'm not going to worry about it.
Mr. Hayes, you have another comment you'd like to add?
Yeah, just two comments. Number one, I did want to point out there are specific groups that we do require additional insurance on. One of those is, of course, the roller derby girls. They have taken the action of getting their own personal liability insurance through USARS, which is a roller skating group, and we really appreciate them taking that effort to make sure that a possibility. So they really are taking that additional step to make sure that they're covered. Also, the other thing that we need to understand about the floor is that it is wood, and when you sand down wood, at some point you get down as far as you can possibly go. And so we have 2 more good sandings on that floor, and then we'll be at the point where we will actually need to replace the whole entire floor. And so that's about 20 years out. That's something that we're going to have to take into consideration. Do we get really good use out of it and we get another 20 years before I have to do one more sanding, and so I get 40 years out of it? I don't know. We just, as my department, my concern is making sure that it lasts as long as it possibly can, because I understand that there is going to be budget issues, in the future. And so am I going to allow donkey basketball on the floor? Absolutely not. And so I just have to play those concerns out and weigh them according to the community and what their desire is.
Mr. Hayes. Any more assembly comments?
Mr. Mayor, I would be amiss if I didn't step in on this one, being one of those roller hockey players.
I was waiting for you.
I imagine you probably were. Yeah, owning wooden boats and stuff, you stop sanding them after a while, because you don't have much haul left if you grind them all the way down to bare wood every year. Maybe there's some other methods, that we can look into the future, but to try to scare people to think that it's only going to last another 20 years, I think is a little misleading. And the other things, I know of one broken wrist and one broken ankle, and not from me, but other people that have been on the court when I've been there. And I don't remember any liability being pressed against the city. So, I think we all understand what the risks are, and we go into that with our eyes wide open. So, not saying that we would never be sued, but then that could happen with a child being run over by a bicycle or tricycle or whatever, So, it's just one of those sort of inherent things whenever we get outside of our house and actually put our feet underneath us and walk into the public. So, anyway, I just wanted to make that statement, and I didn't want to be off the record for this one.
Thank you, Member Wallhooter. I'd like to make one comment. It is a community gym, and we should be promoting healthy activities, and it sounds like the people using it are being responsible. And we have Mr. Hayes keeping an eye on it, so I think it's a event we should let continue to happen. I don't know if this is an action item or just a discussion item, so just kind of for discussion. We had the same discussion, it's been within the last 2 years, so we're just visiting it once again. So anyway, that's my only comment. Anybody from the audience like to comment, or do you feel comfortable enough that you're going to be roller derbying away up there still? The guy in the back of the room in the black shirt's the bully that's going to have to stop you. So,
can we just put it on record that I was the one that brought this up? Just throw that out there.
Okay.
Dash the dreams of the donkey riders.
Yeah. So, Mr. Havlick.
Yeah, Ms. Mayor. No, I just want to make sure that this was one of my ideas, basically because of my paranoia of the years of being a school administrator. We'd have kids fall off a swing in the middle of summer when no one was around, and we got sued and lost because they called it an attractive nuisance because the swings were there. We've had kids fall off sliding boards off the top there and break their arm, and we lost that suit because, again, it was an attractive nuisance and you shouldn't have that in there. So they took all the slides out of the playgrounds. So I just wanted to discuss this in open session to make sure that everyone was comfortable that there aren't any problems, and it doesn't sound like there are.
Any more comments on item C on the top of discussion items? Okay, seeing none. The next item is a letter from Wrangell Mayor David L. Jack. I think we all received. Would this be a good time to take a break, or should we finish this item and take a break before executive session? Okay, well, let's take a. Okay, we'll have one. No, we have one assembly member that would like to take a little break. We'll take a 5-minute recess, maybe a 10-minute recess. Get on, give a shot. Oh, we're missing assembly member. I didn't even look at my clock when we adjourned, so.
Somebody else did.
Okay, the next item we're talking about on the agenda is a letter from the mayor of Wrangell, Mayor David L. Jack, and I'm assuming we all received this. It's in the packet. And what the letter says, I may as well just read it. At the regular borough meeting, regular Wrangell Borough Assembly meeting held on Tuesday, February 26, 2013, the Borough Assembly discussed the following item. Discussion regarding the steps to take to start the process of the required independent review of the sale of individual projects as outlined in the Memorandum of Understanding created in 2008 by the City of Ketchikan, the City of Petersburg, and the City and Borough of Wrangell. The Assembly recognizes that this process will take some time, and therefore the consensus of the Assembly was to look into forming a committee that would consist of Assembly members, members of the community, our SEPA board member, a Thomas Bay Power Authority representative, the Wrangell Utility Superintendent, and our Borough Mayor. The Assembly further recognizes that Wrangell and Petersburg should work together on coming to a conclusion that is in the best interest of both communities. We want to give you a heads up on what we were looking at doing and wanted to get your input before moving forward with the formation of a committee. We would certainly appreciate any comments or suggestions that you might have. So we need to come up with a response to this letter, and I'm sure all of us have been looking into this issue since we've got this letter, and it's about basically, to put it, you know, I guess we did sign a memorandum of understanding in 2008. I can't seem to find a copy of it in our records, but.
Well, we think we had located it, actually, I thought. Mr. City Manager, did you figure out?
Have you located that memorandum, Mr.
We have received a copy of it. We have not, as of yet, found one that has all the signatures on it.
Oh, is that interesting? Okay.
So anyway, what it's, you know, the MOU says that by 2014, the end of 2014, I believe, I've got it there somewhere, we will negotiate, or we will have a discussion on whether it's a good idea to divest SEPA. So that is the gist of the letter. So is there any comments by any other Assembly members? And then I'll give my 2 cents at the end.
Well, Mr. Mayor, actually, I think you and I both gave our 2 cents earlier that I think divesting SEPA is going absolutely in the wrong direction. We should get cooperation as much as we can in Southeast for the development of hydro, and for it to be done to bring economically feasible power to our ratepayers. And selling SEPA assets to me is not a wise or prudent maneuver, and involvement of private for-profit companies is not a wise and prudent maneuver, because the ratepayers don't need to be paying somebody else's profit. And so, but I think we should be communicating. I think what I suggest we direct the city manager to communicate with both Wrangell and SEPA and start discussing this item, because we should also be discussing Thomas Bay and whether we're going to contribute anything to it next year.
I agree. Yeah. Is there any more comments from any other Assembly members on this topic? Member Flint?
Well, I agree, and I feel like our power sales agreement with SEPA is the best thing we've got going here, and we don't want to damage that or lose it.
Yeah, I agree with that as well. And one of the things that this endeavor would involve is talking about the power sales agreement. So who knows how that's going to come out in the end if we went through this process. To have a power sales agreement where we get first rights with Wrangell to the Tyee project, and Ketchikan gets first right to the original power output from Swan Lake has been a good thing for Petersburg. I mean, this year, if it would have Eric Wolf from SEPA would have allowed it, there would have been more of a drawdown from Tyee with the power going to Ketchikan. And it's so I think they're doing a good job of managing the facilities. I'd be real concerned of what we would get in an end result. I think we have to, open up a line of communication with Ketchikan, Wrangell, and SEPA. Last week when I was in Juneau, the CEO from SEPA was there, Trey Atkinson, and had a chance to meet with him a couple different times and just, informally talk about this issue. And he is very agreeable to come and communicate with any of the assemblies or in a group form or however we want to do it. And so maybe sometime in the near future we could get some kind of a discussion like that with either a few assembly members and managers or whoever we think is a good idea to talk about this issue. And I agree with Member Hogue as well, as we need to look at more development. So
I suggest that I don't think we have to make a motion, and we just direct the city manager to open dialogue on these issues and to try to move them forward.
If that's good with the rest of the assembly, I agree with that, and we should respond directly to this letter from Mayor David Jack from Wrangell and just tell him what our plans are. I mean, we want to have the discussion. And one thing that we need to do, though, in his letter, he talks about just Wrangell and Petersburg should work together on coming to a conclusion that is in the best interest of both communities. Well, we're involved in this with 3 communities.
Yeah, we should include Ketchikan.
So we need to have everybody at the table and see how the discussion goes from there.
Mayor, may I make a...
Mr. Havlik?
Mr. Mayor, just to, because I'm not as knowledgeable on this issue as I should be, I'd really like to, eventually as we go through this process, develop a list of pros and cons of, of staying with SEPA or not. For instance, there may be, underground cable repair bills that would just be, that we may be able to not have to take on, or should take on, one or the other, that might make this one move of going divesting might make it better for us or not. The thing is, it'd be nice to have that list so I could make a more informed decision of why we would do this. And it looks like Wrangell is hinting at some rationale here, and I have no idea what it is.
Yeah, I'm not sure either. One thing that we benefit from by having SEPA own the whole system is that they hold all the liability, and we still get 6.8 cents wholesale price on the power. So they're responsible for the upkeep on the lines and the maintenance of all the infrastructure. I would imagine if there was a big catastrophe, we'd all have to pony up and rates would go up, but I'm not sure. Mr. Steve, you had a comment?
Yes. I could put a draft letter together that you could review at the next assembly meeting in response to Mayor Jack's letter, and include in that, it sounds like what I'm hearing is a request to go ahead with some form of a meeting, but also at the same time kind of outlining that we're not necessarily in favor of getting rid of SEPA and selling these assets. I mean, is that what I'm hearing from the group? I mean, in other words, start the process going, because this is really, really complex in a lot of areas. I mean, some of the member Haverlick's asking good questions. We could do this for days. So what's the best way from the Assembly's perspective to have all of your questions answered? I can go off and work with my peers, but that's not necessarily going to get you all the answers that you may have in the top of your head that you have about this issue.
Mr. Mayor, in looking over the MOU, it looks like it calls for an independent analysis and does not call for, it doesn't require that anything be broken up. It's just to look at the economics of the issue. So it may be premature to even make a statement. It may just be they're following through on a process and the economics wouldn't bear out breaking up SEPA in any case. I mean, it may be much ado about nothing, because this MOU appears to require the step of taking the independent analysis of the assets.
And we have until, according to the date on this MOU, of December 31st of 2014. I'd like to ask a question of our Power and Light Superintendent Joe Nelson. Were you aware of this, Joe? Is this always, I looked through my whole document of the divestiture, happened when I first got on the council, and I didn't see this in it anywhere, but I'm not saying it's not an accurate document. I'm just wondering if you'd had discussions of this document with your people in your group.
Yes, I'm aware of the document and aware that it came about through the process of reorganizing the 4-dam pool into SEPA. There were some concerns by individual communities that the 2-dam pool, so to speak, or SEPA, might not end up being a viable organization. Some of us were convinced that it would be. There were others that were not convinced, and so that's where that came from. I would say that tomorrow I go over to Wrangell for the SEPA meeting, and this item is on the agenda, and our attorney is going to speak to this, give us the history of it, and bring it back up. I'll be much better prepared to speak to that after that meeting.
Our next meeting, then.
It should be, I believe, yeah. Can you make a note of that, Debbie, please? Thanks.
And if I may, one more thing. Joe, ballpark, what do you think a study like this would cost?
I don't think one's ever been done quite like this. These are unique projects. The SEPA organization is unique. You won't find something like this in the lower 48. You won't find power sales agreements like we have, these gold mine power sales agreements in the lower 48. There's no way that you'd find power sales agreement like that. So it's a very unique situation. I don't know, picking a figure out of the air, I suppose 100,000, 150. Because you're really going to have to go in depth into the condition of the projects, their age, their what's coming up on the R&R plan, rewinds, governor replacements, et cetera, et cetera. It'll have to be very in depth.
And that's what my concern is
there is a cost associated with this.
That conversation, yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see what comes out of the discussion at the next SEPA board meeting in Wrangell this next week. So we'll have it on the agenda for next meeting. Member Flint?
Mr. Mayor, I was curious who asked AP&T to do a study. Is that just their own initiative?
Do you know that answer?
I have no idea who authorized that study. I just know it was done.
I learned a lot
Mr. Mayor?
from my trip to Juneau from talking with people involved in this whole operation. So, Joe?
I would just like to point out, I'm not sure where those figures came from, what type of mathematics, or maybe they looked at simply the depreciated value. I don't even know if that would work, because the intertie, for instance, which was part of that figure, cost $110 million to build. It's not that old. It's certainly not depreciated out. So But the other thing, when the Fort Dam Pool divested itself of two of its projects, Terror Lake and Solomon Gulch, the Terror Lake project out of Kodiak is very similar in size and the amount of power it can generate in a year's time. And when they came to the table to buy their project away from the Fort Dam Pool, they brought $46 million to the table. So that was in 2006 or 7. So our projects are certainly not worth less than that. So just as a matter of comparison.
Figures, for instance, given to me, Tyee alone is worth $15 million still, I believe, or what they owe on it, the bond for.
SEPA has a debt, total debt on the total system of around $15 million.
Okay, so that's what it was. To buy that out, then you have to pay the bond off, interest included, so it's up in the 20s of millions of dollars, but you get the liability along with it. Anyway, any more discussion on this issue?
Other than I'm now unclear on if you want me to do anything or just wait to the next agenda.
We should wait till after
Okay,
this week.
just want to make sure.
Yeah, it makes sense to me, and I agree with Member Lockadock, because we might be jumping the gun. Maybe just a letter acknowledging to Mayor David Jack from Wrangell that we got his letter and we're considering what he spoke to. We'll get back to him if, with more details. Something just to respond would be polite in my mind. Is that acceptable to the Assembly, or Member Lockadock?
The only caveat there would be that do we have some say in who they choose to do the independent analysis and the costs that associated with that?
I suggest that we may not even agree to do an independent analysis or pay any costs. I mean, we're just saying we've heard them and we'll get back to them when we see what Joe brings back to us.
Let's leave it simple.
Okay.
The letter, thank you for your correspondence. Okay, any more discussion on this item, or have we covered it?
To death.
We beat it to death. Okay, that's the end of the items on our regular meeting agenda. Now we are going to move into an executive session. We need a motion. The Assembly will conduct an executive session with the Borough negotiating team for the IBEW contract for the purpose of discussing the recent mediation meetings and to give direction to the team. We need a motion to move into. Second. Been moved by Member Strand, seconded by Member Haverlick to move into executive session for that reason I just stated. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Unanimous. Kurt, you won't.